Casper! Casper! Up, lad! On your feet! You were asleep. Were you, Casper?
I don't know, sir.
I know! You were! You were asleep! Why were you asleep? You errant scoundrel!
I don't know, sir.
I know why! You're roaming the streets at night instead of being home in bed. See me in my office afterwards. I'll give you something to sleep about. Sit!
Hello everyone, welcome back to the Flicks Files. This video I'm going to be talking about another British movie. I've got a playlist that I'm slowly building called Best of British, where I talk about films that are made in England with a primarily British cast and crew. And this is a movie that I saw way back when I was in secondary school in the 80s for the English curriculum. Part of that was to read a book called The Kestrel for a Knave by an author called Barry Hines. I think it's Barry Hines. And that book was turned into a movie by a director called Ken Loach. Now, Ken Loach is famous for doing very documentarian style films where he will cast regular non-actors in roles in his movie, because that will just make his movie more realistic. And it does, it really works. And he will cast proper actors in key specific roles, but surround them by just normal people. And back in 1969, he directed the film of the book, A Kestrel for a Knave. And that film is called KES. So after we read the book in school, we were then treated to the movie. So over 2 lessons, they would wheel the TV into the classroom on its little stand, and we would watch this movie. And that was the first time I saw it. And I've loved it ever since. And not only for that reason, but this movie connects with me because it's kind of local to where I live. I'm in the East Midlands part of the United Kingdom. And I didn't realize until I looked it up that I'm about only an hour's drive away from where this film was set. So I've often thought I'd like to drive up to the area outside Bradford where this was made to see if I can find some of the locations where it was filmed. And so I have like a special place in my heart for this film because it just reminds me of what it was like to grow up in the 1970s, because not much had changed from the point that I went to primary school after this movie was made. And back then, this is interesting, I had to look this up, but in England, up to 1986, they had corporal punishment, where teachers were allowed to hit students with canes to beat them if, they were doing something naughty, if, whatever that was, smoking a cigarette or talking back to the teacher or whatever it was, they could dole out punishment. And I didn't know this, but I looked up this little fact before I recorded this video, that in England, I think in 1982, there was a law that allowed parents to write to the school to say, you cannot beat my child. So they could effectively opt their child out of corporal punishment. And then in 1986, a law was passed that ruled out corporal punishment altogether. So the practice was stopped. And it's interesting because I started secondary school in 1981. And I don't remember there being corporal punishment when I started back then. And I don't remember any of my friends ever saying that they had the cane, as they call it, where they'd thwack you across the hand with a stick. So maybe the school I went to had already stopped the practice and I was just damn lucky. But my late brother, who was about 7 years older than me, he did get the cane when he was in secondary school in the 70s. So I was kind of lucky. I mean, I was a good kid. I wouldn't have been the sort that would have been belted every week anyway because I was naughty. But it's just an interesting period of history. And the reason I'm talking about that is because that plays a key role in a big scene in this movie. Now, unlike the other reviews that I've done for this movie, I'm not going to do a full walkthrough of the plot. Simply because it's kind of more of a character-driven piece and it doesn't really rely on a plot. So I'm only going to talk about specific scenes, and then I'll leave it up to you to decide whether or not you want to watch this film if you haven't already seen it. But it's a very realistic portrayal of what life was like living in Northern England at that time, in the very late 60s, early 70s. And the main character in this film is a boy called Billy Casper. And I think he's meant to be about 14. He's getting to the end of his school life, and he's probably starting to think about what he's going to do with his life when he leaves school. And the little village where he lives is a mining village. And it's obvious that most of the young men that live there, if not all of them, that are capable, would have worked down the pit and be mining coal for a living. And Billy Casper lives with his mother, who's separated from his father. And he has an older brother who's a little bit abusive and violent towards Billy. So the movie opens where they're kind of sleeping together in the same bed because they're a working class family and they've only got the one bedroom for both of them. And his brother's got to get up early to go to work his job down the mines. And he's completely selfish about being noisy and switching the light on and waking up Billy, who doesn't need to get up for another couple of hours. So there's certain scenes that I want to talk about because that will give you a feel for this movie, and I'll show you the relevant clips. And then from there, you can decide whether you want to watch it. But the basic sort of overarching story of the film is just about Billy Casper. And he's a bit of a dropout at school. And he's a bit of a little bugger in some respects, you know, and he steals from the milkman when he sees the milk float going past. And he's got this little job being a paper boy. And he sees a kestrel flying around above some ruins on some farmland. And he talks to the farmer, and the farmer explains to him that this kestrel has built a nest and it has some chicks. And he decides that he's going to learn the art of falconry and he's going to train one of these kestrels. And that's kind of the plot, is just him and this bird, how it changes him as a character and how it impacts other people in his life. And by that, I mean his brother, for one. And I love this movie because of the scenes around the school, because it just really hits home hard as to what life was like in schools of that time period in England. And there are two scenes in particular. So rather than go through the whole movie, you know, plot detail by plot detail, I'm going to talk about two specific scenes, and then I'll get on to the ending of the movie, which is important. So there will be spoilers, but this movie is, you know, like 55 years old. So I think I'm allowed to give spoilers. But the first scene that I like in this film that really sticks with me is where, as I say, Ken Loach hired real people for a lot of the roles. So the teachers in the movie, with the exception of one character, which is played by an actor called Colin Welland, all the other teachers, I believe, were real teachers. And the head teacher of the school that Billy Casper goes to is a character called Mr. Grice. Now, I don't know the guy's name that plays him, but I know he was a teacher and he did this for a living. So that just adds to the realism of it. And there's a scene where Billy Casper is waiting outside of the head teacher's room and is obviously going to get caned for something, which off the top of my head, I can't remember what it is he did wrong. But there's him and about three other lads that are waiting for Mr. Grice to arrive. And while they're waiting, this other little lad comes up, who's obviously in a younger year than them. And he asks if Mr. Grice is in his office, and they say, no, he isn't. And he says, oh, well, I've got a message for him from this other teacher. And he ends up just having to wait with these other lads. And while he's waiting, one of the lads, who's a bit of a bully, says to this little lad, look, we've got fags, cigarettes, and we want you to hold them. Put them in your pockets because we know that Grice is going to search us. And this little lad, bless him, is going, I'm not going to do that. I'll get into trouble. And they're going, yo, put them in your pocket so we'll beat her up, at playtime.
Are they going to take it? The better, lad. I'll say any prayers.
Okay, but if I get cane, you give me some.
Some fist if they don't.
And so he has no choice, and they empty all these fags and cigarettes and he puts them in his pockets. And then Mr. Grice turns up and marches them into his office. And this scene plays out where he gives them this huge talk about how he's failing as a teacher in trying to instill discipline into these kids. And no matter what he does, and no matter how many times he beats them, they're always going to be little terrors, and cause trouble. And there's a point where he says, right, empty your pockets. He's going, come on, empty your pockets, put all your what's in your pockets on this table. So, of course, they all start emptying the pockets and they're pulling out like grimy handkerchiefs and a few coppers worth of money, and like sweet wrappers. And it gets to this little lad, bless him, and you can see him like going, but sir, I've not done anything wrong. I've just come to give you a message. And Mr. Grice just talks over him and goes, empty your pockets, lad. And you think, oh no, he's not even there because he's done something wrong. He's only like a delivery boy. But sure enough, he's going to empty your pockets. And of course, he ends up pulling out all of these cigarettes. And I always remember the line that the headmaster says when he sees and he's pulling out all these things, and he goes, well, all right, little cigarette factory, aren't you?
Ah, a regular little cigarette factory, aren't you?
So he just grabs his cane and they all hold their hands out and he goes down the line caning them. Now, when they filmed this, he really did cane them and he thwacked them on each hand. And I'm sure I read that Ken Loach gave each of the boys 50 pence or something, which was probably a lot of money back in 1969, if he let them cane them. And you can really tell that he actually did cane them because the kids are genuinely, and some of them have got tears in their eyes. But the bit that really sticks with me, this poor little lad's face, where he's like starting to cry because of the pain in his hands. And you think he's not even meant to be there, it's a real painful, realistic scene to watch. And there's no way that they would ever do that now. If they remade this movie and they reenacted that scene, you can bet your house that they would not really cane those kids. Even if the kids agreed to do it, they wouldn't allow it. And yeah, so it's just that sense of realism that's like threaded through this film. And the other sequence around the school that I love is to do with a PE lesson that Billy Casper has. Now, this kind of resonates with me because when I was at school, I was kind of a gangly kid. I think I was like 6 foot by the time I was like 14. And I was crap at sports. I was slightly asthmatic when I was a kid, and I was just no good at sports. And I didn't have the impetus to be good at sports. And I used to hate it when we were made to play football and rugby. And I don't know what it was, certainly when I was at school in the 80s, but the PE teachers were, and pardon my French, but they were real sadistic bastards. They really were. And they would kind of pick on the ones that they knew were underachievers. Now, whether that was to try and build their character and, make them better kids and make them more physically fit, but I don't think that's what it was. I think they were genuinely just sadistic and they enjoyed it. And there's a scene in KES where they're playing football and their PE teacher is played by a late English actor called Brian Glover, who's fantastic. He couldn't have picked Ken Loach could not have picked a better actor for this role. Now, Brian Glover, I think he was a boxer in his early life, and then he became a professional wrestler. And he turned his talents toward acting, and he was very good at it. In fact, he plays a role in David Fincher's Alien 3. So if you've seen Alien 3, he plays like the prison warden. He's always squeezing like a rubber ball when he talks in that movie. And he's very good in that as well. So he's the PE teacher. And the scene starts where they're in the changing rooms getting ready. And Billy Casper uses the excuse that he doesn't have his PE kit. He's forgotten his PE kit. And Brian Glover's going, why does this happen every time? You know, you keep forgetting your PE kit. And he thinks by doing this, it's just going to get him out of playing football. But what Brian Glover does is he gives him like the stock PE kit that they have in the cupboard. You know, he has like a spare kit for any kid that's forgotten their own, and they're forced to wear it. And he ends up wearing these shorts that are like 3 sizes too big, and he looks so funny in them. And sure enough, they all go marching up onto the field, you know, in the dank English weather to play football. And it's such a hilarious sequence because they're not really playing football. They're just playing a game that's in Brian Glover's head. And by that, I mean the character, the PE teacher that he's playing, he's got sort of delusions of grandeur, and he imagines himself as like an England player playing a very important match. And you know, the whole thing plays out where it's about him scoring a goal and just knocking all the other kids down to the floor. And there's a really funny sequence in it where he tackles a kid particularly badly and like knocks him down into the mud. And this kid stands up and he just like says something like, the fat twat, he wants bleeding milking.
The fat twat! He wants bleeding milking! That big fat get.
And I often think how the hell this film sold overseas because of the accents that they use. I mean, to me, it's fine because I grew up hearing that accent all the time, even though I haven't really got it myself. But it must have been really difficult for Americans to watch this movie and understand what they're saying. I wonder whether it was like, I'm trying to think what other movie it was where they had like was it Snatch, Guy Ritchie's Snatch? And when it was shown in cinemas, they would hand out little cards that had, you know, the meaning of particular words that they would use. But I think with this movie, it's not so much understanding the words that they use, it's understanding what they're saying full stop, because their accents are so thick.
Sugar old Casper.
No.
There never is there? They're just cadges all the time. Casper the Cadger, that's what they ought to call thee.
I'm good out if I had McDowell.
I'll get this something in a minute.
But yeah, it's a right fun little sequence. And the bit in it I really love is where Brian Glover's running to score another goal, and one of the other students trips him up, either wittingly or unwittingly. And Brian Glover then just face plants straight into the mud.
And John goes through.
And it's such a brilliant physical moment. And I've got to play that clip, and I'm probably going to play it 2 or 3 times in a row because it's just the funniest thing.
And John goes through.
And it just shows Brian Glover's previous history of being a wrestler and his physicality, that he's able to do that and not injure himself. But yeah, they're the 2 standout sequences in this movie. Now, that's not to say the rest of the movie is awful, because it is not awful. It's a very good film. So, as I say, I'll run over the rest of it really quickly to get to the end. But basically, he gets this kestrel, which he poaches out of the nest that's in this farmer's building. And he then steals a book on falconry from a bookshop, because he tries to get one out of the library, but the librarian won't let him have a book unless he's got a library card, which he doesn't have. And he's so desperate to get a book that he's not prepared to wait. So he just abandons that idea, goes into a second-hand bookshop and finds a book and stuffs it under his coat. So he starts reading up on falconry, and there's sequences where we see him training this bird. And he gets to be really good at it, and he gets to have the bird be able to fly onto his gauntlet that he's wearing, his glove. And it's lovely. There's some lovely sequences with him, with this bird. And it gets that it kind of changes his attitude at school. And you start to think this is making him a better character. Learning falconry is helping him break free of his working class environment. And there's a sequence where he's in a classroom and he gets to do a little talk on bird training and the falconry that he's learning to do, to the point where he gets most of the kids in the classroom, he grabs their attention. And you can see the teacher, that's played by Colin Welland, looks at him with a certain sense of, fulfillment, that he's seeing this kid thriving in something that he enjoys doing. And I think there's one point in the movie where he goes to see Billy Casper outside of school to watch him train this bird. But unfortunately, it does build to a very sad ending. Now, I'm not the kind of guy that easily cries, and I very, very rarely cry watching movies. And there are probably 3 movies off the top of my head that whenever I watch them, I don't, but it gets me welling up and tightens my throat, to the point where I have to think, just calm down. And there's 3 movies that have that effect on me. One of them is this film. The other one is a science fiction movie called Silent Running. Now, you may or may not know that movie, but if you don't know that movie, I'm going to be doing a deep dive on that movie. So if you subscribe to my channel, you will see a video about that film. And when I do that video, I will definitely go into the ending of that film and explain why it just breaks my heart every time I watch it. And certainly when I first saw Silent Running as a kid, I cried. It was awful. And the third movie that really hits home hard and makes me tear up is Field of Dreams. Now, the ending of Field of Dreams, I'm not going to go into what that ending is, but it always used to upset me anyway. But about 20 years ago, my father died. And certainly whenever I re-watch Field of Dreams now that I've lost my father, it really hits home hard. And it's a lovely movie, and I love watching that movie. But there's times I think, I want to watch it, but I'm going to leave it for a bit longer because I know the impact it will have on me, when I get to the end. And yeah, KES is one of those movies. And basically what happens is his elder brother he gives him some money and tells him to go down to the betting shop and put a bet on a horse. And Billy does, and he gets to the betting shop and he asks a guy in the betting shop if this horse is likely to win. And this old guy's like looking at this newspaper, and he says something like, "Oh, it's got no chance, it's an outsider, you're wasting your money putting a bet on that." So Billy thinks, "Oh, well, stuff that then, my brother won't know whether I put a bet on or not. If it doesn't win, it doesn't matter because he won't have won anything." So he uses his money to go and buy himself some fish and chips, and he enjoys his fish and chips. And then he thinks, "Oh, with what I've got left, I'll buy some meat to feed to his bird." And I think the butcher ends up giving him some scraps for free. And the minute he does that, you kind of think, I know what's going to happen. And sure enough, it turns out that this horse did win. And he learns from the bookie that if he had have placed that bet, he would have won about £10, which in 1969 was a hell of a lot of money. It was probably more than a week's wage. So he's terrified as to what his brother's going to do when he finds out he never placed the bet in the first place. And I know there's a sequence where his brother comes into the school to try and find him. So he has to hide. And I think he ends up finding him. I might be remembering this wrong, but I think he ends up finding him hiding in one of the stalls in the boys' toilets, and he beats him up off camera. And the really sad thing is he goes back to the area where his bird is nesting, and he gets the glove on and he's calling for the bird to come, and the bird doesn't come. And he rushes home because he thinks, my brother has done something to this bird. And he learns that, his brother's killed the bird and just shoved it in the dustbin. And it's just so heartbreaking. And the last scene of the movie is KES being lifted out of this dustbin, you know, this body of this dead kestrel. And he just walks it out into this area of woodland and gently buries it into the ground. And it's so sad. Even now, just reliving it in my mind, I can feel myself getting a little bit, oh. But yeah, it's a very, very sad ending. But it's also a very, very good movie. It's a very good film. And as I say, Ken Loach has built a career out of making movies that have that documentary feel. And I think it's that documentary style that this movie has that makes the ending hit home even harder, because you just believe that this Billy Casper is a real lad at that time. And you're just an observer, you know, watching his life. And it's heartbreaking. But let's try and keep it, keep the atmosphere light. It's a brilliant film. And if you haven't seen it and you live in America and you want to give it a go and try and, you know, get through that accent, then I would definitely recommend it. I mean, there may be websites that have kind of broken down the dialect and that can help you understand some of what they're saying. It's not too bad. Maybe I'm playing it up too much. But yeah, I absolutely love it. So that's KES, directed by Ken Loach and released in 1969. I hope, even though this has been quite a sad video, you have enjoyed this. And if you did, give me a thumbs up. And if you've watched this and enjoyed it and seen a few others of my videos that you've really liked, then, you know, you might want to think about subscribing. It doesn't cost anything. As long as you have a YouTube account, it's easy to do, it's free, and it will really help me out. So thank you for watching, and I'll see you on the next one.